This is an AI-generated podcast based on the article From Drumsticks to Dream Jobs: How Justin Pullman Found His Identity Beyond the Title, written by April. The article link is in the show notes. Justin, welcome to Kingdom Factor Collective. I'm really glad you're here.
Thanks so much. Really excited to be here. This is great.
So I want to start at the beginning because your story has this really vivid starting point. You've described yourself as worse than a vegan who does CrossFit when it came to your identity as a drummer. Can you just paint that picture a little? Like, who was Justin before the pivot?
Yeah, that's accurate. So I grew up in church, came to faith around 7 or 8 years old, and music was it was everything. I played drums at every church I was part of. I picked up a touring gig with a Texas country artist, and for a stretch, I was literally hitting things with sticks for a living. Teaching drum lessons on the side, working about 6 days a week, and I loved every minute of it. Like, that was my whole identity. Within 5 seconds of meeting you, you knew I was a drummer. It ran that deep.
And then it ended, and not because you failed at it, right? It was actually a choice, a really hard one.
Yeah, so here's what happened. My second child was born, and the reality of tours and babies is just a terrible combo. I mean, I had done 150 shows in my son's first year of life, and at some point you just have to, you do the math, right? And I thought, Dad is a way cooler title than drummer, so I stepped off the road. And in the silence that followed, I genuinely didn't know who I was anymore. That was the hard part. It wasn't losing the career, it was losing myself.
That's a really profound loss that I think a lot of people don't talk about. You ended up at a car dealership, which I have to ask about this. How did that happen?
They said yes. That's it. That's the whole answer. I needed something, and they said yes. And look, I will tell you with a straight face, when customers said they needed to talk to their spouse before buying, my honest response was, I think you should. So needless to say, not the best fit.
I love that. But there was a moment, a specific moment on the service drive where something really clicked for you. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, so I picked up the phone one day and I heard a voice come out of my mouth that I didn't recognize. I said all the right words, but the tone behind it had this real disdain for people. And I thought, who was that? Like, that is not me. And that was the moment I thought, okay, I cannot stay here. So I did what any responsible soon-to-be father of 3 would do. I quit, with nothing lined up, about a week before our third child was born.
A week before. Okay. And your wife, Shay, you've said she's way out of your league. How did she respond to that?
She is absolutely out of my league. 12 years managing a single income with 3 kids who like to eat 3 times a day. And we prayed through it together. They saved enough to take a breath, and I used that time to finally sit still and listen. Like, actually listen. And that's where things started to shift.
So you're in that season, you're taking career assessments, and they keep pointing towards sales, which you resisted. But then you took a copier sales job anyway, and something unexpected happened in the training process. What clicked?
Right, so the training philosophy was simple. No problem, no sale. You can't pitch a solution until you've uncovered the real issue. And I started applying that framework to my own career history, and the picture came into focus really fast. Job searching is painful. Onboarding is usually a mess. The process of going from a stranger to a valued colleague is just rarely smooth. And I thought, I can help with that. When I mentioned it to people around me, everyone said, yes, obviously you should do that. And Shay reminded me she'd been saying exactly that for years. So, she's smart.
That's great. So that eventually led you to HR, to recruiting, to LOPA, and then to Resound Coaching. And you've called yourself the world's most reluctant entrepreneur. What does that mean?
I never wanted to start a business. Like, genuinely never. The coaching work started as a class at my church. I'd watched too many people stuck in the same loop I'd been trapped in. Careers carrying the full weight of their identity. I asked if the church had anything to help people who felt stuck. They didn't. I offered to create something. They said yes. And then God just kept pushing it. So I said, okay, I'll lean into it. But every step, the website, the startup costs, real dollars, every step was prayerful, not performatively prayerful. Genuinely leaning in and waiting to hear.
That phrase, not performatively prayerful, I think that's the thing a lot of Christian business leaders wrestle with. Like, what does it actually look like to integrate faith into decisions, not just tack it on? Can you give me an example from your own life?
Yeah, so taking the job at Lopa is a good one. When I joined, I sensed it was a reason and season role. I didn't totally know why. Then my daughter had a serious accident, and the organization's benefits turned out to be extraordinary provision. And I just thought, okay, God, if that was the only reason I had to take this job, we're good. Thank you. That's it. That's the whole thing. Faith integrated decision making isn't reserved for the big moments. It runs through all of it: which job to take, how long to stay, what the season is for.
That's really moving, and it brings me to what I think is the core of everything you do. This idea that your job is what you do, not who you are. How do you actually help people shift that in coaching?
So, the foundation I always come back to is this: our identity as believers is children of God first, full stop. Everything else that comes on top of that has nothing to do with who we are. And I see it constantly. People whose sense of worth rises and falls with their job title. They're searching for this big purpose, waiting to be unlocked by the right role. And that's actually where people get the most lost because they're looking in the wrong direction. God definitely calls you to do things, but that calling can change in different seasons of life. Who you are and what your purpose is do not change based on your job title. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and honestly, for leaders who are exhausted by the pressure to perform and prove, I think that's the most practical thing in the room. Justin, this has been a really rich conversation. What's the one thing you'd want someone listening to take away today?
Know who you are before you figure out what you do. Like, really know it. Children of God, created to do good works, to love others, to make disciples. That's the foundation. Once you have that, the right work can actually begin. It took me a long time to find that place, but it turns out it's enough to start.
I love that. Dustin Pullman, talent acquisition business partner at Lopa, founder of Resound Coaching, and a guy who knows exactly who he is now. Thank you so much for being here. Links to the original article and more about Justin's work are in the show notes. We'll see you next time on Kingdom Factor Collective.